Arden was an old man, older than most would believe. The years had drawn deep lines across his forehead and left his silver hair thin, but his eyes were clear, carrying the weight of ancient memories. Once, in the land of Eloria, he had been called a wizard, a word that now felt as distant as the stars. He arrived in New Terra on a cold morning, with nothing but a travel-stained coat and a cane carved long ago. The city was nothing like the places Arden had known. Steel towers rose higher than any castle, and people hurried everywhere, their faces closed against the world. No one noticed the old man as he made his way through narrow streets. He moved slowly, leaning on his cane, but his gaze lingered on the strangest details, the way light struck rain-soaked stones, or the pattern of crows gathered on power lines. Underneath the noise of engines and city life, he listened for the quieter things, for the echoes of magic. He found himself before a small, weather-beaten library. Its windows were cloudy, its door reluctant to open. Inside, rows of forgotten books stood in silence. A handful of people sat among the books, their attention buried in tablets or hushed conversation. Arden walked the aisles, brushing his fingers over cracked leather and faded titles. Science manuals, instruction guides, he saw little of wonder, little of old stories. He sat down in a corner, feeling both invisible and oddly at peace. As dusk drew in, he closed his eyes and drifted into uneasy sleep. In his dreams, he saw the ruins of a tall tower, its stones dark with centuries of rain. Through its highest window, he watched a city swelling with nameless energy, a city that was neither friend nor foe. When Arden awoke, the library was empty. A new day waited beyond the dusty glass. He straightened his coat, picked up his cane, and stepped back into the restless city. Arden was a stranger here, but he still carried the memory of magic, a memory that refused to fade. Something told him he had come for a reason. Perhaps, if he looked carefully, he would find the traces of wonder hidden in this world of steel and stone. And so, he continued his walk into the unknown, as the city slowly came to life around him. Arden spent his days wandering through the different districts of New Terra, learning its rhythms and its silence. Though the world outside had changed, some truths remained. Each evening, he would return to a small rented room above a pastry shop, the air heavy with the scent of sweet bread and coffee. The routine comforted him but left him restless. There was always a feeling at the back of his mind, the sense that something hid just out of reach. One morning, a thick fog rolled down from the hills, cloaking the gray streets in white. Arden left early, using the mist as cover as he moved through the heart of the city. He paid attention to things others ignored, the cats slipping through alleyways, the strange electric humming under his feet, the patterns left by rain on old bricks. Sometimes he would pull a small notebook from his coat and make sketches or notes, copying down details of the city that felt important. He marked places where he sensed something, an echo maybe, or a lingering presence. It was faint, almost like the memories of a forgotten song, but every so often, when the wind was right or a shadow passed in the right way, the feeling grew stronger. Arden wasn't sure if it was magic, or simply his own longing for the world he had lost, but he followed it all the same. One afternoon, as the last of the fog burned away, Arden found himself in an older quarter of the city. Here the buildings leaned close together, their stone facades cracked and vine-choked. There was an air of neglect, but also of history. He stopped at a gated courtyard, drawn by a cold draft that seemed out of place in the late-season warmth. Peering through the bars, he saw a circle of stones on the ground, too intentional to be natural, yet too old to have been put there recently. Something in their placement reminded him of the standing stones in Eloria, where energy would gather on certain nights. He reached out and let his fingertips graze the iron gate. For a heartbeat, he felt that old familiar current, a pulse both welcoming and mournful. As he stood lost in thought, a voice startled him. "You looking for something, old man?" It was a woman, sharp-eyed and wary, dressed in the stained coveralls of a street technician. Her hands were knotted with calluses and a soldering iron stuck from one pocket. "I'm just exploring," Arden replied, steady and quiet. "There's history here, isn't there?" She considered him for a moment, then shrugged. "Not much left that isn't buried. Or forgotten on purpose." Arden gave a small smile. "Not everything can be buried forever." They stood in silence for a moment. The woman glanced down at his cane, at the sigils burned into the old wood. "That yours? Looks old." Arden nodded. "Older than this city." The woman's lips twitched in a half-smirk. "Well, be careful. The city chews up old things and spits them out." She turned and started away, then paused. "By the way, people call me Lyra. If you're going to poke around, you should watch your step. Not everyone's as polite as me." Then she was gone, leaving Arden alone with the iron gate and the hush of the hidden stones. That night, Arden returned to his tiny room, a strange weariness settling into his bones. But his mind was awake, racing. He dreamt of Eloria's circles of power, of messages written in stone and air, of voices calling to him across the ages. The city outside was changing, but beneath it, something waited to be found. He knew one thing for certain. The traces of magic survived, hidden in plain sight, and there were others, like Lyra, who remembered more than they let on. Whether they would help or hinder him, Arden couldn't yet say. But for the first time since his arrival, he felt the faintest spark of hope. Days passed, and Arden's steps inevitably led him back to the old quarter, drawn by the memory of the stone circle and the brief encounter with Lyra. He soon saw that the city's oldest districts held secrets missed by most. Strange patterns in the cobblestones, faded symbols carved above doorways, even stories whispered in barroom corners. Arden listened and watched, his patience that of a man who has outlasted centuries. One evening, he found himself in a small tavern soaked with the smell of ale and old wood. The patrons spoke little, the city had taught them suspicion. He sat alone in the back, tracing the rim of a chipped mug when Lyra appeared. She slid into the opposite seat, glancing around before speaking. "You're persistent, old man?" Arden nodded. "Old habits die hard." She snorted softly, then leaned in. "You never said what you're really looking for." Arden, after a pause, answered honestly, "I'm searching for something ancient, something that's part of this city's foundation. Call it magic, call it memory, but it's still here, even if people choose not to see it." Lyra studied him, her wary expression softening a little. "You sound like my grandmother. She used to talk about things in the shadows, places where the city went cold. People thought she was crazy, now they just forget." Arden smiled sadly. "Forgetting is its own kind of magic, an unmaking." They spoke quietly for a long time. Lyra told him about the city's hidden places, abandoned subway tunnels where lights flickered for no reason, a market where no one grew old, a well behind a church whose water ran warm in winter. She confessed she had seen and felt things herself, an impossible song in the air, doors closing by themselves, dreams that seemed more like messages. At last, Lyra produced a crumpled slip of paper from her pocket. "My grandmother left this. She said it was important, but I've never understood it." She slid it across the table. Arden smoothed out the paper. On it, drawn in careful hand, was the pattern of a spiral, surrounded by unfamiliar runes. His breath caught. He recognized the script, the old tongue of warding, a language that had nearly vanished with Eloria. The spiral, he knew, was a map, a guide to something hidden. "This," Arden whispered, "could lead us to what I've been looking for." Lyra's eyes widened, yet she did not pull the paper back. "If you go, I'm going with you." Arden nodded. "We may not be safe. Old powers sleep, and waking them has a price." She shrugged, but the determination in her gaze was clear. "Maybe what we've forgotten needs to be remembered." Outside, the city's traffic roared and lights blinked in the lowering fog, but at their quiet table, something shifted in the air, a sense of purpose, the beginning of a true alliance. The next morning, Arden packed his few belongings and left the bakery room for the last time. He and Lyra met beneath the cracked arches of the southern bridge, her pack slung across her shoulder, a grim set to her face. Together, following the map, they descended into the city's oldest bones, the tunnels and catacombs beneath New Terra, where the daylight faded and silence pressed close. As they walked, Arden felt the ancient power growing stronger. The darkness seemed watchful, the air dense with secrets. Lyra walked a step behind, alert and resolute, her every breath steady with anticipation and fear. They had no way to know what waited in the depths, only that they were not alone, and that the past in New Terra was not yet finished with them. Descending stone steps slick with age and neglect, Arden and Lyra entered the deep places beneath New Terra. Their footsteps echoed in forgotten corridors where roots crept through cracks in the masonry and cold moisture dripped from the ceiling in steady, patient intervals. Arden moved ahead, holding his cane in front of him, the old runes on its shaft almost shimmering in the gloom. Their only light was a battered torch Lyra carried, augmented by a faint radiance that seemed to cling to Arden's presence. Along the walls, Lyra spotted more of the strange spiral patterns she'd seen on her grandmother's paper. Some still visible, others half buried behind rubble or faded paint. The path spiraled downward until the air grew so thick, Lyra found herself shivering in her jacket. They passed through a heavy metal door that creaked unwillingly at their push. Beyond, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. Its ceiling rose out of sight, shrouded in darkness, and the floor sloped gently downwards to a mosaic circle that mirrored the spiral map. At the center stood a pedestal of ancient stone, untouched by time or vandalism, as if protected by something unseen. Arden stopped just inside the threshold. He breathed deeply, letting the centuries of dust and memory fill his lungs. "This is the place," he whispered, voice trembling not from fear but something deeper, reverence or perhaps relief. Lyra approached the mosaic, torchlight dancing across fragments of colored tile that formed runes she could not read. "What now?" Arden pulled a small object from his coat, an amulet worked in gold and glass, humming quietly as if recognizing a kindred power. "Many years ago," he said, "our worlds were filled with wild wonder. Then came silence and then forgetting. But this city was built atop old bones, some of which never truly died." He set the amulet upon the pedestal. The runes on the floor flared softly in response, the spiral pattern running with blue and violet light. The air grew warmer, humming with a presence, like the beginning of a great storm. Suddenly the stone chamber seemed to breathe. Shadows on the edges twitched and shifted, and Lyra heard a sound like distant thunder or the murmur of hundreds of voices. She stepped back, but Arden placed a steadying hand on her arm. Out of the whirling lights, an apparition emerged, a figure robed in ancient garb, its eyes reflecting centuries of loss and wisdom. It spoke in the old tongue first, then its words shifted and settled into the language of New Terra. "You have come to awaken what was buried," it intoned. "Do you remember the cost?" Arden bowed his head. "No magic is without sacrifice. But this city is hollowing. The soul is dying. We wish to revive life where only memory lingers." The apparition regarded him and then Lyra, as if weighing presence and intent. "Blood and memory built this place. If you succeed, nothing will remain unchanged. If you fail, even hope will be erased." Lyra hesitated, but her voice rang out clear. "We choose to try." The chamber's lights flared. Tendrils of energy wrapped around the amulet, the pattern on the floor came alive, and a surge of warmth and meaning flowed into the very stones. Arden closed his eyes, drawing upon the last reserve of old power he could muster, chanting words long forbidden and nearly forgotten. For one impossible moment, every wall and surface thrummed bright with light and fierce color, the heart of magic pulsing in the deep. And above, on New Terra streets, shadows recoiled as something ancient stirred beneath them. When the power subsided, Arden staggered but did not fall, and Lyra steadied him. The apparition faded, but a deep, vital strength remained in the chamber's air. The spiral had been set in motion. What came next, neither Arden nor Lyra could fully predict, but both knew the city would never be the same. In the distance above them, sirens wailed, and somewhere in the darkness, footsteps echoed. Others, perhaps, drawn by the waking of something older than the city itself. By the time Arden and Lyra emerged from the depths, the city above was fevered with energy. Across New Terra, people sensed a change they couldn't understand. Streetlights flickered with impossible colors, birds broke into wild song at midnight, and long-blocked memories returned in whispered dreams. Some felt a sudden sadness, others an unexplainable hope. For the first time in decades, people paused in their busy routines to look up at the sky, searching for something just out of sight. Arden was exhausted, every step a struggle as he and Lyra made their way through the labyrinth of back streets toward Lyra's small apartment. News vans rumbled past, police cars screamed down boulevards, but no one paid attention to two shadowed figures in well-worn coats. Inside, they dropped their bags and sat in silence, both knowing there was no going back. Later that night, while Lyra slept fitfully, Arden sat by the window watching the glow of distant sirens pulse and fade. Shadows moved restlessly in alleyways. He saw, or thought he saw, strange flickers of light playing around the old neighborhoods. Arden remembered legends from Eloria, stories where magic could not die, only change shape, waiting patiently for the right soul to call it home again. In the days that followed, rumors swept through the city. Some people reported seeing ancient symbols on concrete walls. Others swore the air tasted metallic, charged with something unspoken. The mayor's office dismissed it all as collective stress, but people weren't so quick to forget. Here and there, old songs and rituals resurfaced. Children invented new games based on old, half-remembered myths. Elders stared out of windows, recognizing something they'd thought lost. Arden and Lyra moved quietly, helping where they could. To some, they were healers, fixing broken clocks or comforting frightened children. To others, they were simply strange, a tired old man and a watchful young woman, both with secrets in their eyes. One gray afternoon, as rain misted the city, Lyra found herself at the spiral circle once more. The place felt different. Above ground now, the spiral in the stones glowed gently, almost welcoming. Is it safe? She asked Arden, who stood nearby. He shook his head. It's never truly safe, not when power stirs. But perhaps it's mending in its own way. Lyra knelt by the spiral, running her fingers across the damp stone. What about you? She asked quietly. Are you staying? Arden smiled, weary but content. My time is nearly finished. The city will make its own story now. You, and those who still remember, will guide it when it loses its way. Hold on to the memory and the magic will hold on to you. A hush fell as if the city itself were listening. For a long moment, the world seemed to breathe in stillness and possibility. On an evening a week later, Arden departed without ceremony. He left a note for Lyra. Wonder never truly leaves. It walks in the shadow of forgetting, waits for those who listen. Our work is never done, only begun again by others. Months passed. The city changed but not as before. Unexplained healings, sudden bursts of beauty, and new kindnesses took hold. The hidden magic of New Terra wound through its heart, woven into every thread of daily life. And sometimes in the oldest quarter, when fog curled by and the old stones sang, a silver-bearded man could be glimpsed at the edge of sight, walking with a cane marked by ancient runes, ready to help the city remember what it once was, and what it could be again.